He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
This One's Wife. Faker in Action Part 1. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. There hasn't been much promotion, as I've explained, in respect of This One's Wife's boring new series. She has done some self-promotion by virtue of stuff that she's posted on Instagram. There was the fan event, which seemed to have been organised in conjunction with Netflix with their funereal banner. It was hardly a big thing. And I've explained in a separate video how the usual promotional campaign that would be anticipated with something like this was conspicuous by its absence. Nevertheless, as she attempts to flog people, raspberry spread, and convince the world that she is the world's hostess with the mostess, that she has appeared on Drew Barrymore's chat show. Yes. Some snippets were released in relation to her appearance, and I'm able to provide you with one of those snippets to then analyse her behaviours, as always, seen through the prism of her narcissism. Let's have a look at the first piece of footage.
He found you.
I mean, look, life is full of surprises. I did not expect to meet H and for this to be our love story. And, you know, I'm very lucky. I am married to the funniest, sweetest, most charming. I mean, he's all the things that you're describing. He's an amazing father. And so, you know, I count my blessings because I have him, and also I have a partner who is so supportive of me. And so I will tell you just, you know, when I was a babysitter nanny for 2 Irish Catholic families when I was in college, and one of the dads said to me, he's like, you know, Meghan, when you meet your person one day, I want him to say to you the same thing that I said to my wife when we got married, which is, I vow to always date my wife. And I told H that when we started dating. He goes, I vow to always date you. So we have this connection, I think, because we're so committed to treating each other the same way you did before you had a ring on it, before it was locked down, when you're just courting each other and you can see all the good and joy in that butterfly period. And that's, I think, what keeps things really alive.
What do we have here then? Well, I can say by way of overview, you are watching a faker in action. As you know from my work, that This One's Wife is a narcissist, which means that when she's interacting with another human being or contemplating such an interaction, it's a manipulation. Some are benign, some are malign. Here, she needs to manipulate 3 groups. First of all, Drew Barrymore as the interviewer and host. Secondly, the studio audience. And thirdly, the audience on television. This One's Wife's narcissism is going to choose a benign way of manipulating those 3 groups for the purposes of asserting control over them and drawing fuel, and also for the purposes of maintaining the facade that she is a loving mother, that she is a wonderful wife, that she is a kind and empathic person, because that is what her narcissism tells her by virtue of her mid-range narcissism. The topic of Harry comes up, and Drew Barrymore explains he found you. Well, as I understand it, that wasn't the case. Rather, this narcissist targeted him. So already This One's Wife is engaged in the misinformation that she's pumped out to make it seem like he came after her, because naturally, in her head, she believes that she's so ultimately desirable that a prince would come rushing for her because she's so tempting and so alluring. We then get a response from This One's Wife which demonstrates the glitching of her narcissism. She explains, life is full of surprises. I did not expect to meet H. That is a lie. Her facial expression is incongruous with the situation. She gives a flick of the hair. She blinks because she's experiencing anxiety, because her recollection of events is at odds with what is being stated in that moment. She continues, or expect this to be our love story. This is a woman in her 40s talking about love story. It is as sickening as it is false. She then looks away. She blinks, she closes her eye, and she shakes her head. This is because there is a fight going on inside her head. The fight is this. Harry is in the sustained devaluation. He's painted black. In effect, she loathes him. However, rather than speak that truth, which is, I can't stand the ginger ball sack, her narcissism's facade management is saying, you can't say that. You'll lose control of the interviewer, the audience, both at home and in the studio. You need to say something complimentary. Accordingly, this is why you get the pause, because the devaluing this one's wife seeks to speak first. And as the words are forming, facade management wakes up and goes, shh, shh, shh. No, you can't say that. You're going to have to say something complimentary. And therefore, that is why there is a hesitation, and she seeks to drag something up that can be said to be complimentary. If this was the golden period, she would be gushing over him without hesitation. But because he's in the sustained devaluation and this is not a respite period, she thinks ill of him, but the facade management is prodding her, saying, you can't say what you really think, you're going to have to compliment him. Thus, she explains, I'm very lucky. I'm married to the funniest, sweetest, most charming. She shakes her head and raises her hands and states, I mean, he's all the things that you're describing. And, brushes her hair again, he's an amazing father, and so you know. And then there's applause, which provides her with fuel and shows that the audience is under control. But what you're seeing here is her experiencing anxiety as a consequence of wanting to say that actually he's a dipshit, but her facade management stating you can't do that. And therefore, her response is completely inauthentic. It is unnatural, because it's coming from a place of manipulation and not a particularly accomplished manipulation. All of the head shaking and blinking and looking away is as a consequence of the anxiety that she's experiencing, because she doesn't have full control in that moment. Her narcissism is essentially fighting against itself in respect of the devaluation of Harry versus the necessity of presenting a particular image of an idyllic marriage to the outside world. And this is the result. The robot software hasn't been equipped to do it, and she's glitching. But she continues, I've got my blessings because he's a partner who's so supportive of me. That's likely to be true, and therefore it's easier for her to state that. And of course, it's all about her. What is interesting is, take a look at Drew Barrymore's expression. Now, I haven't watched a lot of Drew Barrymore, but I do know that she's a particularly tactile host, touching people, hugging them. She's very sort of almost like mumsy and enthusiastic. She's looking at this one's wife with disbelief. I wouldn't be surprised, given Drew Barrymore's upbringing, that she has had some experience of narcissists. And while she might not necessarily recognise this one's wife as one, although she could do, that she's getting a gut reaction, which is, I know what type of person you are. I've met people like you before, and I don't believe this bullshit that you're coming out with. Her expression is one of, I'm not buying this. This one's wife then touches her chin and looks skyward, as her narcissism is then trying to go back to pluck from the Rolodex an anecdote. And she says, when I was, and you'll notice there's a very slight pause, and this is because the narcissism is basically going through a variety of different anecdotes to try and extract one for the purposes of talking about it in order to assert control over the audience. And she says, I was a babysitter nanny for 2 Irish Catholic families. What's the relevance of telling us that they're Irish Catholic families? It's an embellishment. It's an unnecessary embellishment. And I'll tell you why it's an embellishment, because it never happened. One of the signs of a story that lacks authenticity is not the inclusion of detail. Indeed, the provision of detail tends to demonstrate that something is accurate, but it's unnecessary detail. We don't need to know that they're Irish Catholic. And what's happening here is that her narcissism has gone into the depths of the invented anecdotes, selected one, hence the pause as it sought to connect with an anecdote, and has plucked this one to enable her to tell a story which makes her seem like she's a lovely person and she has an idyllic marriage. She continues by explaining, 2 Irish Catholic families. I was in college. One of the dads said to me, "You know this one's wife. When you meet your person one day, I want him to say the same thing that I said to my wife when we got married, which is, I vow to always date my wife." Bullshit. That never happened. The only circumstances where that might have occurred is in a porn movie where the dad shags the babysitter, bonks the childminder. No parent of a child that you're looking after is going to turn to you and say, "You know what, when you meet the person that's your person, I want them to say to you," why the dickens would you care about the nanny's future relationship? You wouldn't. You'd also recognise boundary recognition. It's not really an appropriate thing. A man who's probably a good 20, 25 years older than her to start talking about love and romance with her. It just simply did not happen. But of course, this one's wife's narcissism invents this tale and drags up the invented past in order to assert control in the now over Drew, the audience, both at home and in the studio. So he explains, "You know, Meghan, when you meet your person one day, I want him to say the same thing that I said to my wife when we got married, which is, I vow to always date my wife. And I told H that when we started dating," and I'm going to talk about why she refers to him as H in a separate video, because that requires expansion. "And I told H that when we started dating," and look at Drew Barrymore's face again. She's not buying any of it. He goes, "I vow to always date you." So we have this connection, one of her favourite words. I think because we are so committed to treating each other the same way you did before you had a ring on it, before it was locked down, when we were just courting one another, and you can see all the good and the joy in the butterfly period, and that's what I think keeps things alive. You'll notice that she has a stupid grin on her face throughout, which again is an incongruous reaction generated by her narcissism not knowing the appropriate response to provide in these circumstances. I would put money on it that that event never took place. It is invented by her narcissism in order to assert control in the now over Drew Barrymore, the studio audience and the home audience, by making it seem like she's got this wonderful relationship with Harry, and that somebody who didn't know her very well, the father of the children that she was looking after, just happened to take it upon himself to say to a person that he didn't know very well, who was much younger than him, who was there in a professional capacity, "You know, when you meet your person one day, I want him to say the same thing that I said to my wife." Bollocks! It didn't happen. This is a fantasy of this one's wife. She lives in a fantasy world, and this excerpt from the interview with Drew Barrymore just demonstrates that her response in relation to Harry is faked. The anecdote that she references is faked. This is a faker in action. What do you think? Do you agree with my analysis or do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for watching.